They never asked for your loyalty outright. They didn't need to, because you gave it freely, sincerely, completely. At the time, it felt right. You believed loyalty was proof of strength, of love, of character. But what you didn't see was the quiet shift that happened the moment you gave it, the invisible contract you signed without realizing. Loyalty, in its purest form, is devotion without currency. But in the real world, loyalty is always an exchange. Someone receives your energy, your presence, your trust, and in return, they hold something over you. That's the first rule of hidden debt. Every act of loyalty creates an invisible balance sheet, and if you don't see it, you'll live your life paying interest on promises you never made. Here's the cruel truth. You don't owe people because you were kind to them. You owe them because they remember it. And memory, in the hands of the manipulative, becomes a weapon sharper than guilt. The psychology behind this is simple, yet terrifying. Human beings are wired for reciprocity. It's an ancient survival mechanism. If someone gives, we feel an instinct to give back. But in dark psychology, reciprocity is reverse engineered into control. A manipulator doesn't demand your obedience. They cultivate it. They do you a favor you didn't ask for. They help when you least expect it. They give first because they know you'll spend months, even years, giving back. It's not generosity. It's an investment. And you become the asset. You start defending them even when they're wrong. You make excuses for their mistakes. You silence your discomfort to protect their image. And every time you do, the hidden debt grows, not in money, but in guilt. Because guilt is the currency of control. It's the silent accountant that keeps the books of emotional slavery. What they don't tell you is this: loyalty has an expiration date and a cost. If you give it to the wrong person, it becomes a leash. They'll pull it whenever you try to walk away. And you'll feel it, that tug in your chest, that whisper that says, "But I owed them, they were there for me." Yes, they were there, but they didn't save you out of compassion. They saved you out of strategy. Because loyalty creates dependency, and dependency is the first stage of quiet domination. You see, the Machiavellian doesn't conquer through war. They conquer through gratitude. They don't ask for obedience, they engineer it. Their gift is not generosity, it's foresight. They know the mind's weakness. We mistake comfort for connection. They build their control one favor at a time. And when the day comes that you finally question them, they'll remind you of everything they've ever done for you. Not out loud, not cruelly, just enough to make you hesitate. Enough to make you stay quiet when you should speak. Enough to make you surrender before the battle begins. Here's what's truly dark. You'll think you're being noble. You'll call it loyalty, duty, faithfulness. You'll even tell yourself that staying silent is maturity. But deep down, you'll feel the chain. Because real loyalty doesn't demand silence. It doesn't demand sacrifice at the cost of self-respect. It doesn't turn your goodness into someone else's strategy. What they sold you was not loyalty. It was leverage wrapped in affection, sealed with obligation. The moment you start to see this, something breaks inside you. That's the disillusionment, the collapse of the narrative you built around goodness. It's painful because it means accepting this truth. You weren't betrayed by others. You were betrayed by your own purity. That's how manipulation works. It doesn't prey on your weakness. It preys on your virtues. Your empathy becomes your leash. Your patience becomes your prison. And your loyalty, the thing you were most proud of, becomes the weapon used against you. When you finally wake up, you'll look back and see it. Every time you said, "It's okay." Every time you stayed silent to keep the peace. Every time you lowered your boundaries in the name of love. Those weren't acts of loyalty. They were acts of self-erasure. The truth is, you were trained to believe that loyalty was unconditional. But unconditional loyalty only belongs to gods, not humans. Humans use loyalty as currency. And in every transaction, there's someone paying and someone collecting. So here's your first lesson in power. Never give what you cannot afford to lose. Loyalty is sacred, but only when it's mutual. Otherwise, it becomes a silent debt, collecting interest in the dark corners of your conscience. And one day, when you finally refuse to pay, that's when they'll show you who they really were. Because the true test of loyalty isn't how someone acts when you give it, but how they treat you when you stop. And that's when the mask finally falls. There's a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when devotion turns into debt. It doesn't announce itself. It creeps in softly between good intentions and exhaustion. You don't feel it at first. You think you're being loyal, doing the right thing, standing by someone who needs you. But slowly, imperceptibly, the weight begins to shift. You're not helping anymore. you're serving. And somewhere in that subtle exchange, your loyalty stops being a gift and becomes a cage. Because every time you say yes when your heart screams no, you hand over another piece of yourself. And the person you gave it to learn something crucial about you, that your empathy can be controlled. Here's the cruel psychology behind it. The manipulator studies your pattern of guilt. They notice how quickly you apologize, how easily you justify, how deeply you hate disappointing people. So they build their strategy around it. They don't have to demand. They just disappoint you back. And because your conscience is louder than their cruelty, you'll bend to make things right. That's how psychological debt is created, not through threats or violence, but through emotional conditioning. They give affection in fragments, approval in doses, and disapproval like a blade, precise, time, cutting. Until you begin to self-regulate your own servitude, you'll anticipate their moods, defend them before they speak, and even silence your own pain to keep them comfortable. That's not love. That's indoctrination disguised as loyalty. What they don't tell you is this. The strongest chains are forged with invisible metal, not the kind that binds your body, but the kind that convinces you that leaving would make you ungrateful. You start replaying their kindness in your mind like a highlight reel. Every moment they helped you, listened to you, forgave you, becomes a reminder of what you owe. But genuine kindness doesn't demand repayment. Manipulative kindness always does. They'll never say it outright. They'll just sigh at the right moment, mention how much they've done for you, and let silence do the rest. Silence, after all, is the most effective guilt trigger because your mind will fill it with apology that were never asked for. Most people never realize it until it's too late. They wake up years later, drained and resentful, still trying to earn the approval they were promised long ago. That's the tragedy of loyalty-based manipulation. You think you're building trust, but you're actually building dependence. And dependence always benefits the one who controls the supply. In Machiavellian psychology, this is called moral leverage. It's the art of turning someone's goodness into your authority. They don't need to dominate you. They just make you feel like betraying them would make you a bad person. So you stay, not out of love, but out of fear of your own conscience. Here's the paradox. The more loyal you are, the more you'll be tested. The more selfless you become, the more selfishness you'll attract. Because predators don't hunt the weak, they hunt the consistent. They look for those who will show up no matter how they're treated. Those who confuse endurance for loyalty. Those who will tolerate discomfort in exchange for belonging. And that's how emotional control evolves. Not from power, but from predictability. Once someone can predict your loyalty, they can weaponize it. But this doesn't make you naive. It makes you human. The mind craves stability, even in pain. It wants to believe loyalty still means something in a world that exploits it. So you give and give and give, hoping that one day it will be enough. But loyalty, when unreciprocated, becomes emotional currency spent on an empty account. And the manipulator will keep you investing by promising a return that never comes. That's the debt cycle. Emotional economics at its darkest. You'll start to notice something strange. When you finally pull back, when you finally set boundaries, they'll suddenly remember every good thing they ever did for you. They'll speak of everything we've been through, as if history alone justifies their entitlement. But loyalty isn't a contract bound by time. It's a bond bound by integrity. And once integrity dies, so does the contract. That's the moment of clarity most never reach. The realization that you don't owe people who exploit what you gave freely. Your debt was never real. It was an illusion, sustained by guilt, protected by manipulation, and enforced by your own silence. When you see that clearly, something within you hardens, not into bitterness, but into awareness. You stop explaining yourself. You stop apologizing for detaching. You stop mistaking endurance for virtue, and you finally understand the cruel symmetry of power. The more you give, the less they respect you. The moment you withhold, they panic because your loyalty was their safety net. Without it, they're exposed. The true cost of devotion isn't exhaustion. It's identity erosion. Piece by piece, you become the reflection of what others need until you forget who you were before you started owing everyone. And when you finally say no, they'll accuse you of betrayal, not because you wronged them, but because you stopped paying interest on a debt that never existed. That's when you realize you were never indebted, only indebted to the illusion of being good. There's a reason guilt feels heavier than fear. Fear comes from what others might do to you. Guilt comes from what you've already done to yourself. And manipulators know this. They understand that fear can be resisted, but guilt owns you because guilt convinces you that you're the villain in your own story. That's the most dangerous kind of control. When the captive starts defending the cage, You see, the human mind has a mechanism called cognitive dissonance, the discomfort of holding two opposing truths. I'm being mistreated, and I'm loyal can't coexist peacefully. So your brain rewrites the narrative. It says, they must be right, I must be overreacting, because it's easier to doubt yourself than to face betrayal. That's how the manipulator wins, not through argument, but through confusion. They keep you in a loop where your guilt is proof of your goodness, and your exhaustion is proof of your commitment. The cruelest part, you'll feel proud of your own suffering. You'll wear it like a badge. You'll mistake endurance for moral superiority, when in truth, it's emotional servitude dressed as virtue. Here's what they don't tell you about guilt. It's the most efficient control mechanism ever invented. You don't need bars or threats. You only need a conscience that's been weaponized. That's why emotional manipulators never fully forgive you. Even after reconciliation, they'll leave traces, subtle reminders of your past mistakes. Phrases like, remember the time I stood by you? I never held that against you. I've always been the one who understood. Each word drips with unspoken credit. They're not forgiving you. They're reminding you that you owe them for their forgiveness. That's how guilt becomes an infinite contract. You pay, not to make things right, but to keep the peace. And peace, in manipulation, is just silence under pressure. Let's dissect this further. When someone learns to anchor your identity to your loyalty, they don't need to control your choices. They control your self-image. They make you believe, I am loyal, therefore, I am good. So the moment you try to leave, your brain translates it as evil. If I stop being loyal, I become bad. It's genius in its cruelty to imprison someone not by threat, but by their own moral compass. That's why the kind-hearted suffer the most, because their morality becomes their leash. They're not afraid of punishment. They're afraid of being unjust. The manipulator never punishes. They disappoint. And disappointment cuts deeper than anger because it makes you question your worth, not your actions. You'll start walking on eggshells, not because you fear conflict, but because you fear losing their approval. That's how emotional loyalty transforms into behavioral conditioning. Every sigh, every glance, every I expected better from you teaches you how to obey without realizing you've been trained. The Machiavellian mind understands this. They know that the most obedient servant is the one who believes he's free. They'll let you speak your truth, as long as that truth protects their illusion. Because in every relationship built on leverage, there's a silent hierarchy. The manipulator plays the savior. The loyal one plays the sinner. And as long as that story continues, power never changes hands. Most people live their entire lives trapped in this cycle, repaying emotional debts they never owed, apologizing for disappointments they never caused, protecting people who only ever protected their own power. They confuse gratitude with servitude and mistake being needed for being valued. But being needed is not the same as being respected. When someone needs your loyalty to feel powerful, they don't love you, they use you. They use your empathy as currency, your fear of rejection as leverage, your desire to be seen as good as a psychological anchor, and you become their reflection, the mirror that keeps their ego intact. Here's a truth most aren't ready to hear. Not every bond is sacred. Some are designed to drain you. We romanticize loyalty as the highest virtue, but loyalty without discernment is just obedience with better branding. The world isn't divided between loyal and disloyal. It's divided between those who use loyalty as a weapon and those who mistake the wound for love. The manipulator will always tell you they value loyalty, but what they really mean is, I value predictability. They want to know you'll show up, even when they disappear. They want to know you'll forgive, even when they cross the same line twice. They want to know you'll stay loyal to the idea of them, not the reality. But here's the shift. Once you see the pattern, the spell breaks. Once you name the manipulation, it loses its power, because awareness is the only debt collector they fear. They can't guilt you once you understand the equation. They can't silence you once you know the script. And that's when the dynamic flips. Because the moment you stop owing, they start owing. They'll sense it. That chill in your presence, that stillness in your replies, that lack of emotional reaction that once fed their power. It terrifies them. Not because you've changed, but because you've stopped being predictable. That's the real rebellion. Not rage, not revenge. Indifference. Indifference is the final stage of psychological freedom. It's when your emotions no longer serve their expectations. When you stop being the mirror and become the observer, they'll call you cold. They'll say you've changed, and you have, because you've learned the ancient Machiavellian truth to be ungovernable. You must stop needing to be understood. And that's when loyalty returns to its rightful owner, you. The moment you detach emotionally, the game shifts. You stop reacting and suddenly they lose their rhythm. Manipulators thrive on reaction. Every side, every defense, every explanation you give is data to them. They're constantly adjusting, calibrating, learning how you move. But silence is the one thing they can't decode. When you go silent, they start projecting their own fears onto you. They start imagining what you're thinking, and that imagination becomes their punishment. They'll text you things like, "Are we okay? Why are you being distant?" Or the classic, "I just miss how things used to be." Don't be fooled. That's not remorse. That's surveillance in disguise. They don't miss you. They miss the version of you that gave them power. Silence creates a void, and power shifts to whoever is most comfortable with it. They can't stand the uncertainty because uncertainty means they're no longer in control of your narrative. You, on the other hand, are learning to breathe inside that void, to understand that your peace is not emptiness, it's clarity. Here's the hidden psychology behind silence. It forces the manipulator to confront themselves, something they spend their entire lives avoiding. Your silence becomes a mirror they can't escape. They'll panic. They'll accuse you of ghosting, changing, acting cold. But what they really mean is, you stop making me the center of your emotional universe. And that's unbearable for them, because to the manipulator, control isn't about dominance, it's about relevance. Once they lose emotional access to you, they lose their identity. You'll notice a pattern. At first, they'll try charm, the sweet nostalgia, then guilt, the subtle reminders of how much they've done for you, then provocation, pushing buttons to make you react. And when that fails, they'll go silent too, not because they've evolved, but because they're hoping your empathy will pull you back in. They know silence is your weakness too, that aching need to explain, to fix, to clear the air. But this is where your power lies. Don't explain your evolution to those committed to misunderstanding it. Silence, when intentional, isn't cruelty, it's calibration. It's choosing not to spend your energy proving your worth to someone who benefits from your doubt. You see, silence doesn't mean absence of communication. It means selective presence. You speak less, but every word you do say has weight. You stop reacting to every emotional ping. You stop defending your peace as if it's a crime. And slowly, the balance shifts. They'll start to feel what you once felt, the uncertainty, the tension, the confusion, because you've turned the mirror around. That's the art of strategic withdrawal. You don't abandon the field. You change the terrain. Silence also reveals who truly respects you. The ones who care about your well-being will reach out with empathy. The ones who cared about control will reach out with entitlement. "Why didn't you tell me? I deserve an explanation. I thought we were closer than this." No, what they thought was that they owned emotional access to you, that they could summon you at will, and you'd come running with your heart in your hands. But silence teaches them a lesson no confrontation ever could, that your attention is earned, not owed. The Machiavellian strategist doesn't seek revenge through chaos. He restores balance through withdrawal. Power isn't about being louder. It's about being unshakable and quiet. When you learn to sit still while they unravel, you've already won. You don't need to prove them wrong. Their own behavior becomes your evidence. Remember this. Manipulators are addicted to being understood. They thrive when you try to rationalize their rationality. But the moment you stop trying to make sense of them, you remove their lifeline, your empathy, because understanding someone is a form of connection, and connection, even negative, still feeds them. So stop explaining, stop defending, stop hoping they'll finally see your side. They won't. They can't, because empathy is a language they only pretend to speak. True silence isn't passive. It's surgical. It cuts through noise, through guilt, through emotional fog. It says, "I no longer need to prove that I'm good. I just need to be free." And that's when you step into what I call cold clarity, a state where emotion no longer clouds judgment and loyalty no longer dictates worth. They'll say you become heartless. They'll say you've lost your warmth. But what you've really lost is your tolerance for being drained. And that's not cruelty. That's self-respect. You've stopped offering emotional gold in exchange for validation crumbs. You've stopped mistaking intensity for intimacy. You've stopped mistaking guilt for growth. You're not colder. You're just no longer willing to be controlled through your kindness. This is the paradox of silence. It screams the loudest truth, that you've finally chosen yourself. And for the manipulator, that's the one truth they can't survive. Part 4 complete. Next part will cover TERTOF calculated detachment, where you'll learn how to use emotional distance as a long-term power strategy. Detachment isn't apathy, it's precision. People often confuse the two because they've only ever seen two modes, obsession or indifference. But detachment is the space between both, where emotion still exists, but no longer commands you. It's the art of feeling deeply without being ruled by what you feel. And that is terrifying to manipulators because they can't use what they can't trigger. When you were attached, every word they spoke could alter your state. A compliment could lift you. A silent treatment could destroy you. You lived in reaction, a marionette pulled by invisible strings of validation. But calculated detachment severs those strings, not by becoming numb, but by learning the discipline of emotional sovereignty. It means this: you still notice the insult, but you don't chase the explanation. You still feel the rejection, but you don't internalize the narrative. You still see the manipulation, but you don't feed it with outrage, because outrage, too, is a form of attention. Here's what they never tell you: power isn't built through dominance, it's built through stability. The most powerful people aren't the loudest, they're the calmest, because calmness signals one thing: control. And control terrifies manipulators. They want chaos. They need chaos. It's where they thrive. Confusion, guilt, emotional overexposure. When you remain still, when you don't rise to their bait, they lose their footing. They start unraveling in the silence. They expose themselves through desperation. You no longer need to expose them. They do it for you. Detachment doesn't mean you stop caring about people. It means you start caring about reality. You stop clinging to potential and start observing patterns. You stop investing in promises and start measuring consistency. You stop romanticizing who they could be and accept who they've already shown themselves to be. That's emotional maturity, the kind that feels cold because it burns away illusion. The manipulator's power always depended on illusion, that they were indispensable, that you'd fall apart without them, that your identity was tied to their approval. Detachment dismantles that illusion piece by piece. When you stop reacting, they feel irrelevant. When you stop explaining, they feel unseen. When you stop chasing closure, they feel powerless. And suddenly, the entire dynamic collapses because what they were feeding on wasn't you. It was your energy. Psychologically, detachment activates what's known as the observer state. It's when your mind begins to watch instead of react, to study instead of absorb, to recognize manipulation as behavior, not as a personal wound. It's not easy because attachment isn't just emotional, it's chemical. Your body gets addicted to the cycle of reward and punishment, the dopamine rush of approval, the cortisol surge of rejection. That's why it feels like withdrawal when you detach, because it is withdrawal. You're breaking a neurochemical bond that once felt like love, but was really dependency. This is the dark truth most never face. You can love someone and still see that they're toxic for your peace. You can forgive someone and still walk away without closure. You can care deeply and still choose silence over suffering. That's not cruelty. That's awareness. Machiavelli once wrote, "Men are driven by two things, love or fear. When both fail, they become powerless. Detachment strips them of both. They can no longer control you through affection because you no longer crave it. They can no longer control you through fear because you've already faced the worst, losing them. And once you've survived that loss, you realize something profound. You never needed them for strength. You only needed them for contrast. They were never the source of your power. They were the mirror that revealed it. There's a serenity that follows detachment, not the peace of avoidance, but the peace of awareness. You start noticing how much noise existed inside your mind, how much of your life was built around trying to be understood. And when you stop needing to be understood, you start to understand yourself. You realize that most of your suffering came from resistance, the refusal to let people reveal who they truly are. But now, you watch patterns, not words. You measure energy, not apologies. You trust silence, not explanations. That's not cynicism. That's clarity. Here's the irony. The moment you stop chasing power, you begin to embody it. Because real power doesn't pursue, it attracts. It doesn't chase validation, it radiates certainty. When you're detached, your presence becomes magnetic. Not because you're performing confidence, but because you're no longer leaking energy through emotional dependency. You become unreadable, and that's where your leverage lives. Unreadable people are unpredictable, and unpredictability is psychological dominance. They can't play a game they no longer understand. They can't manipulate what they can't measure. Eventually, you'll meet someone new, a different type of person. They won't be drawn to your vulnerability or your warmth. They'll be drawn to your calm, your silence, your refusal to overshare your mind. They'll sense the difference, that you're not controlled by emotion, but guided by principle, that you can love, but never at the cost of your power. And that's when you'll realize you never lost your softness. You just learned how to protect it. Because the world doesn't destroy kindness. It only destroys kindness without boundaries. And detachment is the boundary between your heart and their hunger. You're not colder now. You're just no longer negotiable. And that's when you stop being the prey and start becoming the mirror that hunts them instead. Part 5 complete. Final part will be THE awakening. When YOU become untamable, the closing transformation and philosophical conclusion. Power doesn't arrive like thunder. It comes quietly, in the way you stop explaining yourself, in the way you stop apologizing for your silence, in the way you start walking through chaos as if it was just weather. That's the moment of awakening, when you realize you've become something different, something untouchable, not because you've escaped emotion, but because you've mastered it. You see, control was never about others. It was always about you, your impulses, your attachments, your fears. They used to own you. They dictated your tone, your choices, your self-worth. But now, you've inverted the equation. You no longer seek validation from reaction. You seek it from restraint. Every silence becomes a declaration. Every step away becomes a negotiation. You've learned the paradox of real control, that the one who feels least governs most. And yet, the one who feels deeply and still governs becomes divine. When people try to test your boundaries now, you don't argue. You don't defend. You simply observe, like a king watching a pawn drift toward its fate. There's no anger, no vengeance, just awareness, because anger still implies they matter, and vengeance still implies they exist inside your story. But you've written them out. That's what they never expect. Not your rage, but your indifference. They're prepared for your retaliation. They're not prepared for your absence. This is where most fail. They confuse freedom with chaos. They think being untamable means being reckless, doing whatever feels right. But that's not power. That's reaction in disguise. Being untamable means you can no longer be owned, not by people, not by emotion, not even by your own illusions. You operate from principle, not pressure, from precision, not impulse. It's the evolution of power, from control over others to control over self. Here's the cruel beauty of it all. When you finally master your emotions, you become the emotional trigger for everyone else. They'll call you cold because you don't flinch. They'll call you manipulative because you no longer reveal your intentions. They'll call you distant because you've learned the price of closeness. But deep down, they'll respect you, even fear you. Because in a world addicted to validation, self-containment looks like divinity. You start to move differently. You speak slower, listen longer, and react less. You realize most conversations are traps designed to extract your energy, to bait your defense, to test your weakness. So you stop performing clarity for those committed to misunderstanding you. You stop negotiating with chaos because you finally understand. Silence isn't the absence of response. It's the presence of dominance. In psychology, this is called disidentification. It's when you no longer fuse your identity with other people's projections. When you stop believing that every emotion must be expressed. When you detach not just from them, but from the version of yourself that needed them. It's not arrogance. It's transcendence. You've outgrown the game. And that makes you unreadable. The world will still test you. They always test the quiet ones because silence feels like mystery, and mystery threatens their illusion of control. They'll provoke you. They'll project onto you. They'll call you emotionless, selfish, cold. Let them. You no longer exist in their emotional economy. Their accusations are invoices for energy, and you've stopped paying. The Machiavellian mind doesn't crave chaos. It orchestrates it, then steps aside to watch. You've learned to influence without words, to lead without validation, to win without visibility. That's the highest form of psychological warfare, control through restraint. Because what they can't predict, they can't prepare for, and what they can't understand, they eventually fear. Soon, the silence that once felt lonely will start feeling like protection. The detachment that once felt cruel will feel sacred. The restraint that once felt like loss will feel like mastery. You'll look back at your old self, the one who chased, who explained, who overgave, and you'll realize something brutal and liberating. You were never weak. You were just untrained. No one taught you that compassion without strategy is a weapon against yourself, that loyalty without discernment is servitude, that forgiveness without distance is surrender. But now, you know, and so you no longer seek peace. You embody it. Not the fragile peace that demands quiet surroundings, but the unshakable peace that moves through storms untouched. That's when people start calling you dangerous because they can't find your buttons. They can't locate your weakness. They can't make you flinch. You've become untamable, not because you've hardened, but because you've awakened. You understand now that control isn't the goal, clarity is. And with clarity comes authority. Authority over your own emotions, authority over your own narrative, authority over when, where, and how you engage. The world bends toward those who do not need it. And that is the final stage of dark psychology mastery. You are no longer at war with others. You're no longer seeking justice in emotional economies that never paid you fairly. You've learned to play a different game, one where silence is your sword, clarity is your shield, and solitude is your throne. Because in the end, power doesn't shout, it watches, it adapts, and it remembers. And when you walk away, you don't look back, because kings don't chase pawns. The world only respects two kinds of people, those who command it and those who no longer need it. And now, you've become both.